Hello, and welcome to the Everyday Business Problems Podcast. I'm your host, Dave Chrysler. Each episode, we talk to business owners and leaders to learn about their story, their business, the challenges they've overcome, and the challenges they still face. You'll hear fresh insights, real talk, and get inspiration to grow your business. Hey, everybody. So excited to be able to welcome Eduardo Martinez to the podcast today. Eduardo's most recent experience was with Cummins, where he was a leader in supply chain and manufacturing for more than 2 decades. Prior to that, he had a successful career in finance. Eduardo, I'm so excited to welcome you to the Everyday Business Problems Podcast.
Thanks, David. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, you've got such an incredible amount of experience, and I'm very thankful that you agreed to come on the show today and chat about operational excellence for manufacturing, because again, your experience and the size of organization that you worked for and led is tremendous. So super excited to get into this with you.
Yeah, I'm humbled by your comments, David, but what I really do is I try to solve complex supply chain problems by inspiring people. Number one, deploying in order to achieve operational excellence. Second, deploying the right technology. And third, focusing on environment sustainable governance. And that's how I try to do my work at whatever I am.
Yeah, well, and that's why I'm so excited to get into this with you, because I think that we both resonate from the people standpoint in understanding that to really be able to move the needle anywhere in any type of a situation, especially one that you kind of get cast into and, maybe understand what the goals are, but how you're going to get there might be a little bit of a gray area. But, in order to do that, it's really about engaging people and, pulling on some of these other levers. So that's why I'm so excited to get into this with you today. So tell me, Eduardo, you've been responsible for so many different types of facilities, size-wise, what they produced or what they were manufacturing. In some of those instances, how were you able to identify opportunities for operational improvement? What did that look like for you?
Yeah, well, the first area that I think is important is always, you got to walk the place, right? There's nothing like visual observation. Go to Gemba, they say, and that's a reality. In most of the facilities what I've recognized very early in my career is that the individuals doing the work are the ones who know the most about what the problems are. So that's number one, engaging with the workforce and understanding what's getting in their way to achieve the goals that we have established is number one. Second is just observation, right? Walking around, understanding what the bottlenecks are. And then, of course, focusing on the metrics, right? And understanding what metrics we're not achieving. And then utilizing, different problem-solving techniques, whether Six Sigma is what applies or some lean transformation tools. But the reality is there is no substitution for walking around.
I completely agree with you. I mean, I think a lot of people almost take that part for granted and don't spend enough time. I know I was guilty of that, especially early on in my career, not spending enough time out on the shop floor. But what I learned very quickly was as you get more and more responsibility and you have larger organizations that you're responsible for, not only does that come with kind of bigger challenges in terms of the goals that you're trying to meet, but it really hits home in terms of you not being the expert at what people do on a day-to-day basis. Therefore, you have to, in my opinion, and sounds like you agree, right? The only way to be able to move the needle and to not only identify some of these operational improvements, opportunities, but to also then move the needle is by engaging the people that are doing the heavy lifting. And, I know for me, as I developed throughout my career, that was the only way I was able to be successful. When that unlock finally happened for me and I started to do that more regularly, that was the real unlock in terms of being able to achieve the things that we were able to achieve. And I say that very specifically, that we were able to achieve, because it wasn't just me. I might have been ultimately responsible, but it was the people out there and their input that really led to those different improvements throughout, each one of those organizations.
Yeah, I had great mentors that taught me two things: that really leaders are there to set strategy, but to remove all the obstacles for the people that know the work to achieve those goals. And that, along with managing my walking around, you really get the sense of what is getting in the way. Whether you need to equip them with additional training. If you're going through a lean transformation, you got to follow that up by equipping operators, forklift drivers, with the right knowledge as to what you want to accomplish. Encourage them to get there, but sometimes you got to provide the tools to get there. So just doing our leadership work to remove the obstacles for the capable people that we have to achieve them.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And kind of to that point, to add just something, I'd love to get your take on this, but, often I've seen, from a leadership perspective, we can be quick to throw technology at a particular problem. But when we take a step back and don't always just try to look for that potentially quick solution, and technology isn't always a quick solution. Sometimes it's very costly and in terms of implementation time and all of that. But I think often we can look to technology, and what will happen when you don't have well-documented processes and a good training program in place, and you're not really engaging the people at the ground level, you can put technology and actually put yourself backwards in terms of the process and people dealing with that process. And that can really be frustrating for people out on the shop floor.
Yeah, when nobody ends up using the technology that you spend so many resources to get. But I think it's all depending on how you introduce the change, right? Every technology change is going to bring something new to the manufacturing floor, to the distribution center. And when you do that and you do the right change process, explain what you're looking for, what is in it for them that are doing the work. Is it going to do it better? Do they feel that it's going to replace them? So when you go through those changes, explain what you get to the other side with with additional buy-in from the individuals that are doing the work. But like you said, most importantly, technology solves a lot of problems. Innovation solves problems, but not all the problems. And I think that every organization needs to have a solid continuous improvement philosophy. I was lucky to work for a company that had an operating model for all of our operations, and one critical step is continuous improvement.
Yeah, thanks for kind of digging into that a little bit deeper. Definitely agree with you there. So, obviously throughout your career, you've had some significant wins in terms of, business turnarounds and financial KPIs. Can you take maybe just a little bit deeper dive? I mean, we've talked about, I feel like, some of the high level thoughts with this, but can you take maybe just a little bit deeper dive into some of those, processes that you were able to use to not only strategize, but ultimately execute to get you some of those wins? I mean, we obviously talked about engaging people. What were some of the other things that you were able to utilize from a process standpoint to be able to achieve the things that you have?
Sure. It all starts by, again, engaging the people that know best, right? Whenever you are faced with a challenge, you need to go around and ask, your direct reports, the organization, what do they believe the challenge is and why is it happening? Then you collect all of those inputs, right? You look at the metrics, you look at the financials. I happen to have a strong financial background to understand, do we even have the right metrics, that are reflecting the financial impacts of what people believe are going on. And then you combine all together in the strategy sessions in order to understand, the most likely causes that you're going to focus on. And then, along with the team, you determine what problem solving processes you're going to use to get to where you want to be, right? If the problem is you have invested a lot of capital and you're not getting return for that investment, then you need to understand the process of approving and allocating capital, right? Are the business case strong? Is the business case strong, but the execution was not strong? And then you determine which step of the process you need to focus on and what problem-solving methodology you're going to use. And that's where technology may come about, right? You may find yourself with a yield issue in a particular process, and when you look at the process, the methodology, it's all there. Then, the employees are capable, they're trained. Then perhaps you need, a piece of technology that can help you, improve yield, for example.
Yeah, thank you for again going into some detail there, because I think sometimes that's difficult for people to understand what that pathway looks like, and how, it's not linear, right? Depending on what the situation is kind of dependent on what you need to deploy to ultimately be successful, not only from the strategy standpoint, but the execution standpoint. So
It's
I
totally
appreciate
not
you.
linear. It's totally not linear, right? If you have a production issue this morning that completely stopped your line, you probably don't have the time to do the process that I mentioned, right? You jump to step one, step two, and step three in the problem-solving methodology. So having the ability to determine which improvement process you're going to use, it also is critical, right?
Yeah.
When the speed matters, and in most businesses, the speed matters, right?
Yeah, and you brought up a good point, because a lot of that does happen on any given day with any given situation in terms of that firefighting activity that has to happen. But the best leadership not only is able to fight the fire, because sometimes that's what you have to do. You have to put the, kind of immediately extinguish that, but then also recognizing that you have to set some time aside to go through this process that you've outlined, because that's the way, from a long-term, stability and ability to achieve standpoint, that you're going to do that. You've got to spend the time to be able to gather the people, talk about strategy, ultimately start on a path of execution. So, while that firefighting activity does happen from time to time, the best leaders, at least the most successful ones I know, also recognize that some time needs to be blocked off to get back into, strategy and execution from a long-term standpoint.
Okay. It goes all back to the plan, do, check cycle.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you want to talk about that a little bit, Eduardo? I'd love to get, a little bit of your take on that. I think most people understand what that is. And I feel like I see people implement it slightly differently, obviously following the concept, but I'd love to get your take on how you've utilized that in your experience.
Well, most large companies, David, have operating systems that really embed the plan, do, check within the systems, and they may be all encompassing and going all the way back to how do you treat your suppliers, as to how do you do your planning, how do you do execution, and most importantly, how do you check, right? What are the KPIs, what are the things that you monitor within your process to make sure that it's actually delivering the output that you look for. But at the end of the day, when you look at the plan, do, check process, it is such a simple concept to implement, and you don't really require a full operating systems. You just need the methodology and the calendar to determine your planning cycles, your execution methodology, and your tracking methodology to look for those improvements in capacity, improvements in waste reduction, environmental reduction, whichever the activity is. The simple plan, do, check always fits.
That's great. Thank you. So I like to switch gears maybe just a little bit and
Sure.
take a bit of a deeper dive into your experience with circular manufacturing. You had a long kind of history dealing specifically with this. And so can you, maybe for people that aren't familiar with that term or exactly what it is, can you maybe just give us a brief definition and talk a little bit about your experience with it?
Yeah, David, and this is critically important today when we're seeing, temperature rise and the focus on environmental sustainability. And circular manufacturing, was born quite a few number of decades ago, and it looks to reduce the material and energy in the manufacture of products and services, right? Just as a broad description of what circular manufacturing is. And you can simplify it by saying that, you need to reduce um, the number of waste and the waste that you uh, produce, the materials that you employ, or you need to reuse it. And if you cannot reuse it, you need to recycle, right? So reduce, reuse, recycle. And for different industries means different things. For example, in the cellular phone industry, about 20% of the components of phones are reused in a different form in new phones. So if you think about you're creating a phone in the concept of take, make, and dispose, right? You take a phone, you take the materials, you make a phone, you use it, 4 years later you dispose it. But there's right now about 20% of value being salvaged in general for those equipments. In industrial products, it goes to 60 to 75%.
Wow.
So, what ends up happening from a practical perspective is you're not utilizing resources to create the metal again. You're taking a used product back and you are employing high technology process in order to bring it to a specific original specs and resell it again, right? Saving the resource extraction, the creation of the metal, the waste that usually goes into manufacturing and industrial product, and then selling it by employing techniques from the simple to advanced. You end up with a part that looks like new and acts like new from all practical purposes. Now, within that process, most people don't go out and design a product with a secondary design that says, this is the way that we're going to manufacture and assemble it. And this is the simple way to disassemble it and get back to the original components. And a lot of companies are changing, particularly in high electronics, where they realize that a lot of the metals that they use are finite metals or very hard to get metals. They are moving to design for disassemble or designed for reuse or designed for remanufacturing, because they realize that when they manufacture the first time, and the processes they use sometimes makes it almost impossible to disassemble and salvage the components that are salvageable. And it doesn't work only with your company. You have to work through the entire supply chain, from the supplier of the original component to the customer or distributor when your product is a B2B, in order to collect all that used product and have the right processes to bring it back to usability. So the model of take, make, and dispose is being really challenged and circular manufacturing is a solution. And there are many companies in all over the world, but particularly in the States, that are very advanced in circular manufacturing. And there's several organizations that support that. For example, Mera. Mera is manufacturers for sustainable manufacturing, and they even created a seal of, manufacture again, so people can trust that a circular product, will perform to the specific, characteristics that it is bought for, just like new.
That is really interesting. Some of the points that you brought up in there, I've heard of the terminology before, and I didn't realize how in depth it really went. So, kind of a follow up question to that. And I know it will probably be different for different manufacturers, but when you look at designing a product with the thought process of disassembly in mind from the beginning, when that disassembly happens, in your experience, are these manufacturers taking those components and recycling them back to raw material, or are they designing these components in a way that they can either modify and or refurbish them to be reutilized in a newer technology down the road?
Yeah, there's a very large variation on who does what and how.
Got it.
Certainly plastics or products that contain a lot of plastics, recyclable, they get back to be a plastic again. Perhaps not for the same product, but the recycle process takes that material back, so we don't have to consume a natural resource again. For most, let's take for example the automotive and industrial industry, right? When you design a product, you're looking for fuel efficiency for the most, right? If you think about your car or the equipment that consumes fuel, you're looking for fuel efficiency and environmental sustainability, right? So you're thinking about how can we emit less, but be and utilize less fuel, whichever the fuel of choice is. And for that, you are thinking always about the weight of the product, right? The lighter, the easiest to displace. And as you design, for example, a cylinder block or a cylinder head, we used to design those very heavy for durability perspectives. And now, as the industry continues to move forward to higher sustainability and through fuel efficiency, you're looking at components that are lighter and made out of different materials, and those are harder to bring back to life, right? In the old days, you had a big chunk of material, cylinder head, super heavy. You could easily remanufacture that by adding, the material that you had taken out, in order to bring it back to specs through inserts and sleeves and a lot of different methodologies where you added material in a way that it was practical for reuse. But as products like TVs, right? We used to have a TV that it was huge. Now they're super thin, very hard to reuse. Products of other types are getting that complex, and only companies that design and manufacture have sometimes the ability to bring it back because they can now add more material through not an insert or a sleeve, but maybe you can spray hot metal, refurbish and redo the surface of materials or the diameters, and you get to the result in a different way, much more technologically challenged way, but at the end of the day, that's where the know-how and the importance of design for reusability or for disassemble or for remanufacturing is critical.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting stuff, and I appreciate you diving deeper into that for me because it's fascinating, and it's fascinating to think about it from the standpoint of when we talk about process, design to manufacture, and thinking about even changing that with the end in mind, right? It's kind of similar to talking about why do we start off with the customer journey and understand and map that out to really understand how we can impact our own sales process and customer delivery models to ultimately satisfy what that demand is. So that's really, really interesting to me. Eduardo, how then does this other term, ESG, environmental, social, and governance initiatives, how do those differ, or do they differ? Is it just a different kind of terminology compared to circular manufacturing? Can you maybe talk a little bit about the differences, if there are any, and where that kind of terminology came from?
Yeah, ESG is more of an umbrella of all the actions that you need to take to be environmental, socially responsible, which includes the individuals that work for you, right? That's why diversity and inclusion is included within the ESG, as well as environmental. And circular manufacturing is, under that umbrella, because a lot of companies, when they report that they're reducing scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, they include this circular manufacturing effect within their calculations of the tons of CO2 that they're reducing. Right? Why? Because there is a metal creation process, a metal machining process, and the energy and transportation that is involved in creating a product that doesn't have to be done again. So part of the reductions that companies claim, and rightfully so, is because they're reusing a material in a product that was created once. Right? And this product can circle once, twice, and three times through the customer in the value chain. And that's one of the ways that companies are, looking for that sustainability, right? For that E and the environmental. And of course, thinking about the energy that your building consumes, how can you, go to solar or put LED lights in your factory? All of those are important, as well as, reducing the waste, right? When you go to a distribution center, there's always one or two bays that are full of cartons, right? That are ready for recycle. But the question is, how could we not create the carton, right? So returnable containers and other things that are helping companies reduce their footprint. And circular manufacturing is just one of those many. Right? Some other companies are, powering their operations through solar, but there are many ways to support the E and ESG, and circular manufacturing is a big one. It's a big one because in high energy intensive products, not having to make a product the second time, but just refurbishing or remanufacturing the product is, it creates significant impact to the environment. And let's not forget, David, this is profitable. This is a profitable endeavor. Sure, it supports the environmental objectives, but it's profitable for the companies who do it well. And it is cost savings for the customers that use a remanufactured product. Just like the battery that you buy, at Pep Boys, right? They always have a remanufacturing battery. I always choose a remanufacturing product because I know that that's an environmentally friendly product than the one that is new.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I think sometimes with these different types of initiatives, and I'm talking in generalities now, there is a perception that it is always related to an additional expense instead of it being a cost savings opportunity. And we both know that with some cost savings opportunities, there is capital required to make an initial investment in that particular process or technology to ultimately yield the cost savings. But I'm glad that you brought that up, because I think that there remains that perception, and not always and not with all people, but I think at a high level, there is some perception that these types of initiatives are more of a feel-good marketing storytelling perspective than a real world cost saving. So I'm glad that you brought that up. From your direct experience working in manufacturing and doing this stuff, actually being in the trenches, so to speak, implementing these things and seeing what the real world, return on investment has been. So appreciate you bringing that up.
Yeah, and when you think about where we are and where we're heading, even when you think about batteries from electric vehicles, the secondary industry that is growing at a very fast pace is how to reuse the lithium in those batteries. Why? Because it is a hard to mine metal. You don't find it everywhere, right? So there is the sustainability not only has to do with environmentally friendly, but what happens when we quadruple the number of electric vehicles? Are the lithium available enough? Well, there's certainly enough now, but if we plan to go to 100% electric vehicles over the next 3 decades, is there enough of it? So obviously the sustainable piece is, well, if we can reuse the contents of a battery that was created 5 years ago to create, maybe 3/4 of a battery today, it is part of the environmental impact, but also sustainability. What happens if we run out of some of these exotic materials, like in the cell phone industry? So yes, there is a little bit about feel good, right? But that's just the communication piece of it. There is usually a economic case behind it from a risk reduction perspective or a pure profitability play.
Yeah. I like that. So, can you talk, Eduardo, maybe just a little bit about some of the systems that you've had to utilize throughout your career to be able to drive some of these, operational excellence and operational improvement projects? And even as it relates to, the circular manufacturing, I mean, is that all ERP? Are there other systems that you're utilizing throughout these processes to one, understand what the available impact will be, and two, to obviously measure as you're implementing and executing to understand what the real return on investment has been?
That's a great question, Davey. So now this is the point where I geek out on the details. So bear with me here for a minute. When you are in a remanufacturing process, and I have had the privilege really to be part of the industry since probably my first financial job. I was auditing the scrap that was created in a remanufacturing process in the facility that I first worked in a manufacturing environment. To the point where I led a global remanufacturing business for the great company that I worked for before. And through the process, I really, when you think about an end-to-end supply chain and manufacturing systems and processes, remanufacturing has two additional variations that the business has to manage, right? Every business manages the variation with the supplier, right? With the variation of the process and the variation of the demand. Remanufacturing adds two variations that you have to manage across the entire infrastructure. First one is you're going to remanufacture something, so it's got to be returned. So the return rate is a variation that is additional to. And when you get the product back, return, you not always are able to salvage it. So you have a return yield, a return rate, and a yield of processing on top of the supplier variability for new components that you have to bring into. And when you think about ERPs, not all ERPs have modules that allow you to manage these two components across the entire manufacturing or transformation process, right? Whether it is in the planning side, MRPs need to know what is the return rate in the yield, because that produces X% of the demand of components that you need, and you got to top off buying new, right? And those processes change, right? They're dynamic through every day in the manufacturing floor. Your scrap today was 3%, 7%, all that variability looking through windows of time. You have to have an MRP or material requirements planning tool that actually has a space for these two additional variables for you to be able to plan, right? When you think about your bill of materials, your bill of materials usually on building this pen probably has, about 6 components. Well, in remanufacturing, if I'm reusing 3 of those components, I may have 7 additional parts. One is that I was able to salvage this, with a tolerance of X and a tolerance of Y, and they both fit, but they're different. So your bill of materials have to accommodate alternate parts that you bring into the assembly process. Your Kanban processes that most people have implemented through the lean transformations need to accommodate for the product variety. And most importantly, your manufacturing process need to accommodate for the different materials, right? Is this product being assembled with one of the parts is original? I mean, supplier bought. The next one is a salvage part at X tolerance, and the next one is a 3 tolerance. Even your quality vision system need to be able to recognize one versus the other, and understand what's right and what's not from a quality perspective. So these two variations ripple across the ERPs really in order to let you operate a remanufacturing business properly. All the way to your customer-facing pieces of your ERP. Our customers, when they return a used product, what identifier does it have? And what value do you transact it at? So from a pricing perspective, receivables, payables, all across the ERP, it has some uniqueness that not all the players in the industry do well.
That is, I mean, thank you for that because it is just so fascinating. I mean, we could go probably another hour taking a deeper dive and talking about, the quality management side of it, how you're tracking, and planning throughout that process. It is just so fascinating to me, being a process and system person. And again, not having a lot of experience in the circular manufacturing world. I appreciate you going into that and sharing all of that information because super, super fascinating for me personally. So thank you.
I have had the opportunity to work with these outstanding people, very innovative individuals that not only create the first product, but they create the processes to bring it back to the specs of that product. I mean, the industry of remanufacturing is filled with innovative individuals that are always thinking, how can I bring this back? And they have bought into the sustainability, right? And they know that they figured out, from a cost perspective or a technology perspective, that they will be, saving the planet in the long run. And it's just outstanding talent that is in the industry. And I've had the privilege to work with some of the best in the industry.
Yeah, that's amazing. And it reminds me a lot of, the transformation that you see when you get a group of people to be unlocked, shop floor to leadership and bridge that communication gap, those types of transformations. The stories that you're telling, it reminds me a lot of those types of transformations where you see these unlocks and you see somebody that is really innovating in terms of taking, to your point, what that end product is, going back to the design side and understanding how they design on the front end to ultimately be taken apart and recycled and reutilized, how all of that impacts the cost of the products, impacts, obviously the client facing side of things. So yeah, it's super, super fascinating stuff that we're talking about today. So glad that you came on the podcast with me today. As we kind of wind up, Eduardo, do you have any, parting thoughts about any of the things that we've talked about today? I'd like to hear just, some closing thoughts that you may have on kind of anything related to operational excellence, circular manufacturing, anything we talked about, engaging people, you name it.
Sure. Well, one of the things that I'm passionate about is that environmental sustainability and governance are not just for the big companies, because the investment world and the policy is demanding. I think it's going to reach all those mid-sized business and the small businesses. And now is this time to start understanding what is my carbon footprint. How can I positively impact the carbon footprint that I have and that I create with the products, and how I sell them, how I make them, and how I bring everything into the manufacturing process. And that's an exciting place because it's full with challenges, right? And through having the right culture in the company, in the small business is key, because good ideas are not an exclusive gift of management, right? Good ideas are everywhere, and having a culture that engages every employee, that takes all those good ideas in order to make a better product, a more environmental or a more sustainable product, or simply, a better performing product is key. So focusing on the culture, the individuals that make that organization, and having a good idea of your carbon footprint, and you put two and two together, and you create the same profitable products in a more sustainable way.
Yeah, thank you for that. And one of the thoughts that popped into my mind as you were talking about that, especially as and this gets back to my perception comment in terms of thinking that maybe this is just a straight out expense versus there being some ROI on these ESG initiatives. and how it's not just for big companies, that it's really, as you start to get into, the mid-sized companies, excuse me, and I would even argue probably the smaller companies, it's an interesting time, I feel like, and this was what was in my mind. It's an interesting time when you see things happening like the Great Resignation and people talking about people being very kind of receptive and understanding what kind of culture they're working in and wanting something different. I think this is a great time to kind of double down on these efforts, because if you already have a culture that is very inclusive and engaging of people, this is just one more thing to kind of sweeten the deal, in my opinion, and to not just have it be, excuse me, marketing speak, but to really let this live as part of your culture, kind of to your point of what you're saying, and have this be another thing that attracts and retains amazing, talented people, which again is just going to continue to perpetuate your business forward, versus maybe shying away and being a lag company with these different types of initiatives. What's your thoughts about that?
I think you're right on, David. One of the things that I tell people is you got to be able to tell the story, right? If you're doing something good, you got to be able to tell the story that you're doing something good. And the new generations of workforce coming into the market, that's in their first three questions. I had the opportunity to recruit individuals coming out of college, underrepresented individuals from college. And in the first two questions is, what is your company doing for environmental sustainability? Right. So knowing how to tell this story on how this all fits together, it's critical, because you're right. Some people will choose a company because the ability to work remote. Some others are choosing because of the culture. Is it an inclusive company? Do they have, do they treat people well? And others are saying, it's a heavy industry, but is it working on environmental sustainability, or maybe it's leading the way, like the company that I work for before, leading the way in sustainability towards 2050 zero carbon footprint or net zero. And all those are questions that are present in individuals coming out of college, no matter the demographic, no matter the place in the country, and having that story, first being executed, right? Number two, being told in a way that resonates as to why do I want to go work for you, a small, medium, big size company.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on that, Eduardo. I'm pretty confident I could talk to you all day about this stuff, but I will let you go for the day. For anybody that is interested in connecting with you and continuing the conversation, where's the best place for people to get in touch with you?
Yeah, thanks, David. And, thank you again for having me in your podcast with your club. The best way to find me is on LinkedIn, Eduardo Martinez in LinkedIn, and I'm happy to connect with your audience.
Awesome. And I will make sure to put that into the show notes for everybody. Eduardo, thanks again. Thank you so much for listening today. If we brought you any value, please rate, subscribe, and share our podcast. Also, be sure to connect with us on social media by searching @The Chrysler Club. Until next week, I'm your host, Dave Chrysler.